Hi, welcome to Creating Fun Facebook Content that Sells Books. I'm Laura Grimard and I'm here to take you through some pointers. So, a little about me and my books. While I'd normally just focus on the author side of things because of the nature of this presentation and all of the examples I'm about to give, I thought it was better to give an overview of what I write too. I do think that all of this is applicable to any genre, you just have to adapt the examples to suit yourself. I started publishing in 2016 and became a full-time author in 2020. I don't use PPC ads, though I do have a background in them as my job prior authoring was in PPC marketing, but I much prefer to use content marketing methods, including but not limited to the one that I'm presenting today. I write paranormal romance, urban fantasy, and fantasy romance with upbeat and light-hearted tones, consent positive moments, and healthy relationships. I do write across heat levels, sweet to medium, but all of my books have the same underlying tone. During this presentation, you're going to see a lot of different post type examples that I currently use in my social media marketing. I currently use a square format for my posts, as this is what looks good on Instagram and it posts well to Facebook too, so as to cut down on the extra step of making different formats for different platforms. However, Facebook and Instagram are constantly changing what looks good, so keep that in mind and do adjust accordingly when changes happen. I'll also be going into more detail about what to use to create the posts. I personally use Canva as my design program, but you could use any photo editing software you wanted. I schedule everything from my page via Meta Business Center, as when people interact, they can then be invited to follow me, which is good for future interactions. At the end of the presentation, there will be a link to a pre-made template for a Facebook Media Kit that you can customize for yourself, and there will be a discount code for that too. So if you're overwhelmed by the idea of creating your own media kit from scratch, that is also an option for you. All of the content I'm going to show you now tends to be posted in two places: my Facebook page and my Facebook group. I schedule all via Meta Business Center and then just let the content run. I keep an eye on the comments, also through the Meta Business Center, and interact with readers there. Some of the content does also go to my Instagram, but I'm not the right person to ask about Instagram strategy, and that's not the focus of this presentation. At the time of recording, which is August 2024, my page has just short of 5,000 followers and my group has just over 5,600 followers. The slide might update as time goes on, as that is a link, so the numbers will update in real time. My group is bigger than my page following because I ignored my page up until early 2023 and focused on my group. In early 2023, I started using my page as much as possible for reader facing activities, which includes posting there, posting to my own group, and other groups for takeovers too. So I know the question that's probably on most of your minds right now is, does this actually sell books? The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that using this method alone isn't going to make you a millionaire, but when you combine it with other things you're doing, it can definitely help. There are two ways that I'm certain this works. The first is that readers tell me. You can see some of the examples here. They'll comment on my posts and tell me that they've bought, downloaded, or added a book to their wish list. These are just some of the examples. I couldn't fit more on the slide, but I do get them basically every day. The other is that I've run a media set on deep backlist titles before, where there's no other marketing going on other than the standard sell through that they get from my other books. And the result was a spike in sales. The effect is much harder to measure for frontlist series where I'm constantly promoting in other ways, but if it works for the books that I'm basically ignoring most of the time, then it works for my more marketable frontlist. To start with, let's talk about goals. When it comes to social media content, you're mostly trying to achieve two things: interaction and sales. You can't sell books on interaction alone, but it still plays an important role in this kind of social media strategy. The name of the game is getting potential readers to see your posts, and that's where the interaction comes in. The more of it you have, the more of the algorithms are going to show your posts to the right people, and that's good when you have more of the sales posts that you want people to see. Interaction is actually mostly about engaging with your existing readers. You want to keep your books fresh in their minds and for them to have a positive association with your brand. In this case, the thing I'm personally going for is for them to associate my brand with fun, which is something that's pulled across into my books. When it comes to sales, it isn't impossible to attract new readers with social media content, but for the most part, the people you're going to be convincing are people who have already read one of your books. They're just not a super fan yet. So when we get properly started with the examples, you'll see that I work heavily with my brand elements and brand template. So I just wanted to cover the why of that and why not just post memes and content I could find elsewhere on the internet. The answer is that you can do that if you want to, but there are a couple of caveats. The first is the issue of copyrighted images. If you don't own the images you're sharing, you shouldn't be using them for any kind of marketing, or you could end up with a hefty bill. Everyone's personal limit is in a different place, and the argument is going to be what is business use and what isn't. Personally, I'm someone who errs on the side of caution. The second potential issue is that you're risking attracting the wrong kind of follower. Just because someone is interested in books doesn't mean that they're a reader of your genre. Equally, just because someone likes a meme about a vampire doesn't mean that they're a reader. And finally, things you just find elsewhere don't have your branding on them, and they don't have the added brand benefit of brand awareness. Does that mean I never share memes? No. I actually do share memes occasionally, though I'm much more likely to do it in a closed group, either my own or a genre specific one. We're starting with info posts. These are probably what you're used to seeing and doing for most in your social media marketing, and it's true for me too. I do a lot of these. You're always going to want to include these in your marketing because these are the posts that are going to make it completely clear what you're promoting and what you have going on. There are still plenty of ways to make things fun though, and here are some examples I found to be the most effective. So we're starting off simple with information posts. These are designed to tell your readers about your book. The main things I'd suggest for these posts is not to overuse them. While these posts are necessary, particularly around new releases or sales, too many of them come across as too pushy or salesy, so you want to be balancing them with the interactive and intriguing content. You do want to vary your layouts too. Normally, I include both a trope map, which is the top example, and a checklist, which is the bottom example, in each media kit, but I don't post them on the same day. With them, you want to be highlighting key tropes and microtropes, the things that are going to get your readers feeling really satisfying or intrigued when they read. In general, because of how social media works, these are probably going to be targeting your existing reader base, which means you can go a bit further into what they specifically might like. But don't forget that you also want to intrigue any potential new readers that you come across. And always include your cover. You want readers to be able to know what book you're talking about straight away, and this is just the best way to do it. So, for the examples, you've got a trope map for Crown of Blood and Duty, which is a vampire romantasy. Instead of using the exact tropes, I've gone for things that evoke the tropes and the feels of the book. The one thing I could perhaps have done better on this specific one is actually use the word vampire. The other example is a checklist for pumpkin spice and all things nice from the media kit when it had a free BookBuff featured deal. Here, there's less room for detail, but still plenty to get on, including the genre, the tone, and the fact that it's a complete series. And of course, the mysterious teapot, which has always been a huge selling point for this particular series. Moving on to meeting the characters. So, meeting the characters is a great way to draw attention to some of the smaller tropes and archetypes you're using in your book. You're wanting to make it interesting, but to some extent, you'll also be telling it to your readers. I normally stick to the same format when I'm doing Meet the Characters. I'll include their name, love interest, job, where they live, and a small section about them. This is a good place to highlight romance tropes, archetypes, and representation. This is the example at the top where you can see my Meet Snow graphic for Mirrors and Magic. In this case, I'm able to mention things that point to the royalty archetype, the academy setting, and the fact that Snow suffers from anxiety. The other thing I've been able to do on this one is to highlight the Snow White aspects. So there's a lot of information that can make the book sound appealing. And in this case, I do also have character art for Snow, so I've included that on the left, but this part of the graphic is left blank when I don't actually have character art for the character. Speaking of character art, sometimes I'll also do a post like the second example, where I'll point to parts of the drawing that are fun for readers of the series and add in some things about it that might be intriguing. There's a lot less information on this one, but can still give people a flavour of what to expect. I'm sure most of you have seen the she's a 10 or he's a 10 memes going around. Now, think about it in terms of your books. You can go all kinds of ways with this. From what I've found, funny or relatable ones go down best and tend to get more interaction, but that's going to depend on your brand. Often, the ones I found that get the most engagement are to do with food. Things like, she's a 10, but she picks the onions out of her salad, and she's a 10, but she loves licorice. Both of them went down really well, mostly because readers have opinions on these things, and then they start talking about them in the comments. You can also use this as a chance to highlight themes, which is like the top example here from Mirrors and Magic again. It's a Snow White telling, so highlighting the apples and the important recognizable part of the story signals to fairy tale readers that they might like this book, all in 10 words. You can also use them to highlight tropes, which is the second example here. This is a brother's best friend romance, so using that as the he's a 10 really highlights this factor. This book does actually have multiple versions of this particular post, including she's a 10, but her family dinners are really awkward, which is going back to the example of relatable moments. Basically, these are just brief snapshots of your book and can really intrigue readers into finding out more. Now for a peek behind the scenes. This isn't just about the book, it's about the author too. I do this in a couple of ways. I always include at least one book fact on release day, but the exact nature of what it is can depend on the book. There are lots of ways that I've done this. So, for example, if I've asked readers to name a character, which I'll get into in a minute, then I might include that as a fact and say, this person named this animal or this person. Sometimes I'll include my reasons for inspiration behind a book, one of the specific moments, or a character name. The other way I use this kind of post is to share facts I discover while researching my books. Several of my series involve a lot of mythology, and my readers love that. So, this is a good way to share some of the things that kind of got included in the book, influenced certain parts of the book, that kind of thing, which is what you can see in the second example here. So now we've got fun lists. This is a type of content I only do for some books. Mostly, it's if I can think of something fun to do, then I'll do it. And they tend to go down well. The lists do verge more on the tongue in cheek side of things, as you can see from both of these examples. The top one is for First Time's a Charm, which follows a witch who keeps accidentally making kittens when she tries to do magic. The list doesn't reflect a specific scene from the book, but it does get across the tone and the USP of the series. The second example is actually from a specific scene from Falling for a Love Goddess. Anya and Min go for a wine tasting date, but neither of them know what they're doing, so they look up instructions. And then Anya makes a few changes. It's just a fun scene, and it also conveys the general tone of the book, which is very light-hearted and a lot to do with the actual dating process. I wouldn't overuse these, but they are good for a little extra deep dive into a story when you have it. This is a take on the popular meme, if I had £1 for every time something happened, I'd have £2. Or dollars or whatever currency you want to use. I use pounds because, as you can hear, I am British, so that is most natural for me. In this case, you're comparing and contrasting two of your books, though you could do it with more if you choose to, but I've just stuck with two because of making it look neat on the graphics. This works because it's a recognizable meme, just like the he's a 10, she's a 10. And I have readers who have actually shared these because of the format and how much they've enjoyed it. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you are calling attention to plot devices you've used more than once. I tend to include more information about the specific scenes in the copy of the post so people know they're not actually exactly the same. So, for example, in the top one, Azil from Pumpkin Spice and All Things Nice is cursed to live inside a teapot. When Willow finds it, she then works for the whole series to free him. Whereas Sekhmet from Daughter of the Sun is cursed into live inside a sphinx and is freed very early on in the book, and then swears vengeance on the person that trapped her there, and that's actually her full story. So there are differences between the two people getting trapped in inanimate objects. I'm not just using that a lot. But so you just need to make that clear so it doesn't look like you're just using the same thing over and over again. There are a lot more different info posts you can come up with, and there are even more in my media set. Mostly those are about the other books in the series and sending people from one book of mine to a different one, which is why I haven't included them here. They're more or less variations on what I've already talked about. Here are two examples. So the first I include in every media set, and it's basically saying that if you enjoy this part of book A, then you'll probably enjoy book B. In this case, the comparison is Snow White retellings, but I've also used it to highlight tone, cameo characters, and more things like that in the past. It's actually very versatile. The second example is character art. This is something you definitely want to show off if you've got it. So show it off. I have used a template here that I purchased from an Etsy shop, which I thought displayed the character art really well, especially because some of the character art in this series is actually the double page spread. So that is also up to you how you display that. That's just how I've decided to for me. So now I'm briefly going to touch on getting reader opinions. I will be the first to say that you should be careful with what readers' opinions you listen to, especially on social media. But often the most vocal readers are actually the minority opinion holders. However, there are a couple of ways that I do like to get reader opinions, so I just wanted to cover that here because they are great for interaction. So, one of the main things I ask for reader opinions on is naming animal companions in books. And here are a couple of examples of me doing just that are more recent. There are a lot more in the past, but these are just the two that I had access to. The first one is about naming a Gorgon snakes. Because there were two of them, readers got really invested in giving duo names, which was a lot of fun, and I had a lot to choose from. In this case, I said I was picking based on what I felt was right for the character, and that the person whose names I picked would get mentioned in the author note of the book. That is very standard for me. If a reader names an animal in my book, I mention it in the author note. In the second example, I asked for a vote for the name of a kite, the bird of prey, not the flying toy. Because of the series this is connected to, it couldn't be a free for all because all of the names follow a set theme. So I gave them a choice to vote instead. It was actually really close run in the end, which did make it fun. You will notice that the cover is not on this graphic. That's just because I didn't have it. And the story was a little bit of a surprise. I've done this for other animals before, as well as things like naming a murder victim, having names mentioned in a list in books where one was needed, and other things like that. I've also asked readers just to choose the type of familiar before, and that's also been very popular. It does tend to get a lot of interaction, and the added bonus is that it makes readers feel really involved in the writing process. And then, like I said, whenever they have input like this, I do mention it in the author note of the book in question, being sure to give them credit. Moving on to interactive post types. I like to include a variety of interactive posts in my standard media sets. These are mostly designed to keep people interacting with me and my brand while also telling them a bit about my books. While these posts themselves aren't necessarily designed to generate direct sales, many of the comments I showed earlier actually come from interactive posts and not info ones. This is probably because of how the algorithm works. They're seeing the interactive posts more, so they're getting more intrigued, and that's why they're buying. First up, we have questions with options for answers. You can use these to highlight specific scenes or moments from a book that you think will intrigue people and get reactions. The answers should then revolve around two things: the main character's personality and the tone of the book. Basically, these are a chance for you to get across key sellable moments from your book while showcasing the tone of your writing. I do try to make it so that one of the answers is what actually happens in the book. Sometimes readers will create themselves an option D, which is also fun and is a great interaction, especially because then you can talk to them about your answer and it goes around and makes the post get more attention. Moving on to choices. These work on the simple premise of people have opinions on just about everything. But that doesn't mean you should be asking them about anything. You want to keep it on topic for the book to make the most of every opportunity. I have found that choices for outfits are particularly popular, especially as readers will start commenting with what they would change or mix and match about the outfits. It's also easy to keep these on theme, like the top example being for a cocktail party at a beach resort. I've also done ones like what would you be wearing to the vampire ball, like what would you wear to the ball at a fairy tale academy, like this kind of thing. There's a lot you can actually do with this one. The bottom example is slightly more tailored to the book, and in that it refers to the magic system in Apprentice of the Dead, but it is still ultimately a choice. Some people choose based on the animal on this one, whereas some choose based on the Egyptian god. It depends who they are. This game does differ slightly from most of my others, as it includes some custom artwork, the jackal, the kite, the crocodile, and the goose, alongside stock images, whereas normally I just use the latter. In this case, I have the custom drawings, so I feel like I wanted to use them because they're pretty. This can work on a whole range of things. I've done things like which of these animals would you shift into, which is your favorite jewelry piece, which wings would you choose. Basically, there's a lot of scope, though I do always keep it tightly themed to the book. And in this case, you can see that. So the top one is for a book set at a beach resort, and the beach cocktail party takes up most of the story because this one's actually a reader magnet. And the bottom one, the jackal, is actually Annie from Apprentice of the Dead's familiar for the whole thing. So they are actually very tightly linked. Emoji response posts often get a lot of responses because they're easy for people to respond to. The idea is that you lay out a scenario and then they respond with their fourth emoji, the second emoji, their third emoji. You get the picture. Some good things to base the question on are themes, tropes, and events from the book. Like at the top example is a generic discover you're a vampire. But as this book is about Beatrice discovering she's a vampire, it works well. The bottom example is a little bit more specific to the plot, as this is a Snow Queen retelling, so going down the enchanted friend. It isn't clear from these two examples, but I do try to vary which number emoji I ask them for, just to keep them from being the same. It just happens that I pick two that happen to have the same emoji number on them. Basically, keep things simple, and you can create pretty much endless versions of this, but again, you want to keep it on brand. I wouldn't post too many of these, even though they are easy to make and to respond to, simply because they don't really encourage conversation, but they are good as part of a larger media set. Build your own posts are a little bit more complicated, so they do tend to get less individual commenters, but they can still have good interaction due to the conversations they can cause. They can also be good for showcasing important elements of your book. Most of the build your owns I see around Facebook are about build your own man with personality traits, physical traits, all that kind of thing. And they do seem to go down very well. But here are a couple of examples if your brand doesn't actually fit using that. The first is a build your perfect hot drink to go along with pumpkin spice and all things nice, which is set in a coffee shop. It's called Cauldron Coffee Shop, which is why I just stumbled there. The bottom is to plan your own perfect doom to go along with Apprentice of the Dead, which is an Egyptian mythology inspired series set in a mortuary temple. Both of these build your owns are linked tightly to the books, and you can also see that from the choice of coin that I've got to spend. So we've got coffee beans on the top for Cauldron Coffee Shop, and we've got debens, which is the word that I use in the series for money, as the currency in the bottom one. You can make these with anything, but remember not to make it too complicated, and I wouldn't overuse them because the more complicated something is, the less interaction you're likely to get. But it's also good to have a variety of post types, and this does feed into that. Next up is the item on your left or right. These are similar to emoji posts in that they're really easy to play, and everyone has items on their left or right. Though you do get some answers like the floor and the wall, but these things happen. You don't just have to leave it at that what's on the left or right either. You can ask for their reaction to it, like here in the first example, where I've also included the asking for a reaction to what their new Secret Santa gift is. If you want to know how this one is connected to the story, this is actually a reader magnet, and the Secret Santa gift gets broken, and then she needs to go buy a new one. Alternatively, you could also do something like the second option, where it's combining the three items on your left to create a plan for a museum heist, which won't surprise you to know is the plot of the book. Not the items on the left bit, just the museum heist. This allows readers a little bit more creativity in the answers and can make a one word response into something higher. One potential downside I've encountered with these type of games is that often readers are sitting in the same place when they answer the questions, so they always have the same response. It's something to be aware of, and is one of the reasons I don't use these ones as much as the emoji one for easy to play games in a set. Word grids are basically just word searches, but with the list of words hidden. You'll probably see lots of versions of these over social media, like the first word you see is what your 2024 is going to turn out like, or the first thing you see is your major personality trait, or something like that. This is just a book version of that. These are great for general themes, not so great for specific things about your books. You want the maximum number of people to be able to respond. So, for example, Species of Cat, which is the bottom example, works well because everyone knows what a tiger and a lion is. But if you have a magic wielder called something unique to you or even just a little bit unusual, the chances are low that readers are going to find them in the grid, making it a potentially limiting choice in terms of engagement. That's not to say you can't include anything unusual in there. There are some lesser known species of cat in the cat grid there, but you want some of the big things too so that people can find them. As I said, creating these is pretty easy. You just have to make yourself a word search so you can actually ultimately make two different types of content at once, and then just not include it on the graphic, the list of words on the graphic once you're done. Battery percent is another good one. You can reveal a bit more about your book while also still being easy to play, as everyone who comes across the game will have something with a battery percent. These are easiest if you have 10 options for answers, but you can split it up into any number you want. I have done 5 before. I've done a weird number like 11, I think. Like it really does work for anything. It's an easy format to theme to your books, as you can see here. So the top example is for pumpkin spice and all things nice, and all of the options are different drinks. But this does go one further than that, as the answers are also the 10 of the drinks from the titles of the series. And it also has the added question of, are you drinking it? Because I knew readers would have particularly strong opinions, especially as a lot of the options are coffee. So every time I play this, they do give a lot of their opinions about whether they actually want to drink what they have collected. The second example is about supernatural types, and these are more specific to the world building of Purple Oak Oasis, but people still tend to have opinions on of what they do and don't want to be. So they'll still say, "Oh yay, I'm this," or "Oh no, I want it to be this." And sometimes I need to go and use more battery percent. Have seen that one before too. Another way to go is choosing your shirt or sock color. I am aware that I don't have a sock color example on here. I did intend to, I'm not sure what happened to it, but it's basically the same thing, just with sock color instead of shirt color. If you do this one, make sure you have an other category to catch anything that isn't on the list. Even so, you'll probably get people commenting about not having a specific color on your list. Remember that this is the aim of the game. Interaction is basically what we're aiming for. So even those comments are good, though for that reason, I do try to vary the colors I'm using across the various games. So again, it's coming back to themes and moments from the books to give readers an idea about the book or the series, which you can see from these two examples. The first one is drawing attention to some of the somewhat quirky supernaturals who go to Obscure Academy, whereas the second example is fairy tales that appear in my Grim Academy series. Both of these are just giving you a general overview of the series as a whole, because I've used different books for different answers. Question posts are probably pretty self explanatory. These are just asking readers things about themselves that are fun and connected to the books. You don't want to make the questions too personal, but again, it's something to theme around your brand and your tone. What you can ask is very much going to depend on who you are and what kind of relationship and rapport you've built up with your readers. I would be wary of asking anything that will reveal personal information, and I will touch on exactly why that is in a little bit. But there are lots of ways to approach this. So here are two examples of mine. On the top, you've got a hypothetical question about naming a dragon familiar, which is something that the heroine in Tainted Ashes has, which is why it links back to the book. Whereas in the bottom question, it's about the favourite things to do at the beach, as the main character of this book is a beach goddess, and a lot of the plot is centered around them being on a beach. I have used a lot of other things. I do always connect them to my books. So, for example, what is your favourite mug for a series where the character's mug is a thing between her and the love interest? Sometimes a bit more general, like would you want to be a vampire, or what kind of cat shifter would you want to be? Like anything that kind of has a vague connection to the book without being like too in depth so anyone can answer. Going further into the question type posts, you've got what would you do if? It poses a hypothetical situation based on the book, and the readers can then have fun with answering. I do try to make it so these are easy to answer without having actually had to read the book, but sometimes readers do take it a little bit further with this one, especially if they do actually know how things work in the universe. So for the top example about what you would do if you could do magic after drinking tea, it's related to the book because Brew, one of the main characters, is able to do magic after drinking tea. He's a tea witch. Um, and so many people also drink tea that it's really good for getting people talking because they'll be like, oh, well, I must be magical all the time, which I must be. I drink a lot of tea. So, like, it really does get people talking because it's both specific to the book but general enough that people can actually have a conversation about it. The bottom example is a little bit more reliant on people knowing Greek mythology, but as it's Greek, it's fairly well known and enough that most people have at least a little bit of an inkling and probably have an opinion on what they'd do if they found out their crush was a Greek god or goddess. You can imagine the kind of responses I got to this one. A lot of them going like, "Well, I know my Greek mythology. I'm running out of that kind of thing." I do also sometimes use that on the option questions. I do have one where I think it's something like, "Have you've discovered you had a one night stand with a god?" And then the answer is, "You pray it isn't Zeus." So something just to kind of play off people's general knowledge. So, also just a note here that you might have noticed on some of the other games like this, what would you do if you discovered your crush was Greek god or goddess? That I do try to keep the language gender neutral even when it's referring to a specific character. This is just to not exclude anyone, especially as inclusivity is part of my brand. Going a little further into the questions related to the plot of the books, I have a game called Do You Say Yes? This is where you're offering something to the readers, but there's a downside, and the question is whether or not they're going to say yes to the original offer. Some are easier than others to say yes to, and I will sometimes have readers come back and go like, "This one is really hard," and the next week they'll be like, "Oh, this one was easy." But that's also part of the fun. Like some of them are easier to choose than others. So in the top example, it's centered around a masquerade that Agnes attends during Crown of Blood and Duty, but there are vampires there, so that's the question. As you can imagine, some readers are all for it, whereas others are absolutely against it and want nothing to do with vampires. The bottom one is a little more divisive, with offering a jackal familiar, but you have to learn mummification to keep them. It's fully related to the book, as Annie, the main character of Apprentice of the Dead, gets a jackal familiar and then goes on to learn the art of mummification. This one always splits my readers. Some of them want to learn mummification because of the mythology, but then they're like, dead bodies, not so keen. So it actually really gets them thinking on this one, while basically going straight back to the main uh, start of the plot for Apprentice of the Dead. This type of game really encourages sharing opinions, and I have noticed that some readers will ask more questions before deciding on the answer, which is great for interaction. Whenever I answer these questions, I always try and keep with the lore of the book that I've made the original question about, because ultimately that is what I'm trying to promote, and it is more interesting just to keep it that way. Right now we're returning to a popular meme like the "he's a 10, she's a 10" and the "if I had £1 for every time," with "am I the A?" I'm not going to say the full word. You probably know it already. It's not really my brand to say it, so I don't. Even on these games, you'll notice that it started out on the graphics. So this is a little bit the same as the other ones in that you're taking an existing format that your readers will probably already know from their time on the internet, and then you're going to put your book spin on it. So this type of post can be very in depth, but you can really use it to showcase some of the tropes and the interesting parts of your books, particularly if one of your characters has done something that could divide opinion on whether they're in the right or the wrong. It also gives you a good chance to show off character voice, or sometimes give a voice to a character who doesn't actually have a point of view themselves. So the two examples are doing just this. The top one is from The Almost Queen, which is a retelling of the legend surrounding Guinevere and Lancelot. If you know the stories, you probably won't be surprised to learn that I actually had a lot to work with from this book, and it heavily leans on the expected love triangle of Arthur, Gwen, and Lancelot, even though technically in my version of the story it isn't actually a love triangle, but more than that would be a spoiler. Can't have that. The bottom example is one done from a character who doesn't actually have a point of view in the book, but ultimately highlights one of the key plot twists of the main character discovering she's a vampire. It's not a spoiler because it's a vampire series, so everyone's expecting her to be a vampire, but it is like one of the big twists and that she doesn't see this coming. I tend to only do one of these per media set unless I have a really strong idea for multiple, because they are quite involved both for creating and for the readers interacting with them. But you can get some great interaction, particularly on the ones that have questionable actions in them. So here we're getting to more of the comparative types of posts. These rely on your books a lot, and it is easier if you have multiple series to work with. However, I do sometimes do this within one series if the books belong to a series of standalones. It's a good way of promoting two books at once and drawing attention to similarities between series. So basically saying, hey, you like series one, well, you'll like series two too. So basically, you're picking a common element in your book. It can be a big or a small one, and the idea is that you're hopefully moving people from one book to another book. In my case, I always put the book I'm promoting with the media set on the left and the other book on the right. But that is personal choice. Like you can lay these out however you want to. You don't actually have to remake them every time if you've got only a couple of series. I have a lot of series, so for me it's much easier to split them up and just say it's on the left, that's the media set belongs to. The things you're comparing don't have to be good things either. They could be challenges that are faced by the characters in the books. The top example here is mostly meant to push people from one series in another when they're in the same genre, by highlighting the balls and the familiar aspects between them. Whereas the bottom example is focusing on the fact that these two heroines both have familiars. The genres are a little bit different on the bottom two, but a lot of the feel between the books is the same. So it still a works as a comparison. Which Would You Rather Be is a simpler version of the Would You Rather. It's mostly about getting across some quite high level stuff about your books. So for example, is it about witches, is it about shifters, is it about billionaires? You get the idea. You can see some examples here, and they're normally just simple choices between two things. They are easy interaction. But there is a downside to the current layout I have that you can see here, and that's that the full cover and the titles aren't on display. But I do put the titles in the copy of the post itself, as you can see in the example here. Um, the reason I don't have the full covers on them is just so that different posts have a different visual appeal to readers. But I've been considering updating this one, and it's not the first layout I've used for this either. So if you do check out my social media after watching this, and I've already changed the layout of that, you know why that is. It's just because sometimes I do change how things look, and I will then go back and fix all the other ones because I am like that. But you don't have to. Like your all of your graphics don't have to match 100%. So you're not stuck to one particular layout. Once you've done it, you can try something different. You can play around with it as much as you want. Cover this or that is also super simple. You just ask which is their favorite. People have a lot of opinions on this. Some people will decide based on the book itself if they've read it. Some people will decide based on some kind of arbitrary reason. The one thing I would say is don't listen to this as actually which cover is better than the other. That's not what it's about. We all know as authors that different covers serve different functions, and there's a lot of different things that go into them. So don't take this as a voting system for that. I do try to pair covers that are good matches content wise, so it's also pointing readers to the right place. Like I'm not pairing up a sweet fantasy romance with a steamy paranormal romance. Like, they're not matching up, so I'm not doing it. So for example, the top example is labeled with which Snow White retelling cover is your favorite, and the bottom one is which cover featuring a grey dress is your favorite. Other themes I've done for this particular post is things like color schemes, genres, dogs on the cover, tropes, paranormal types. There's a lot of the different things that can all work to be made into a cover, this or that, and it is really simple. It's just two covers which have something in common. So there's actually a lot that you can do with this very easily. So who would you rather switch places with posts? I'm a lot more reliant on the books themselves than any of the previous comparison posts. But like with the others, I do try to pair these up based on themes they have in common. The choice should be both similar enough to be a good comparison, but different enough to actually be a choice between the two of them. So, like, it's a fine line you're walking here. So, for example, the comparison on the top is based around the fact that both of these are paranormal romance with strong second chance romances as the main trope. And the bottom is a genre one, where both of these series are urban fantasy murder mystery with witches. So they're good to be paired up for the choices because readers can go, oh, actually, I like this, so maybe I should try this. So yeah, that's the whole point of this one. A lot of this does come down to comparing books with similar tropes or vibes, because those are the characters that are also likely to have similar problems to choose between. So it's not like two completely polar opposite differences, because there's also no real choice in that. If a reader is choosing between someone who likes going to a Christmas fair versus someone who loves going out clubbing every night, they're quite worlds apart. So it's not really an interesting dilemma or choice. People know what they're doing. Whereas if they're close together, then people give more time to think about it. And that all that time they're thinking about it, they're thinking about your books and your characters. Generators combine multiple things to create one answer. These are a little bit like the build your own in that they're a bit more complicated, so should be used fairly sparingly. Before we go any further, I will admit that the top one breaks one of my upcoming rules about using static information when creating these games, as it asks for your first initial. The reason I've never updated it is because I only actually use this game like once a year or so. There's no risk of it being used more often because I'll only pull it out when First Time's Charm goes on sale, and I don't do that often. It is, however, a very popular game when I've played it, so every time First Time's a Charm is on sale, it does come out. The main thing when it comes to generators is to make your instructions as easy to follow as possible. If someone is confused, they're not going to comment, and you've just lost a chance to engage with them. So there are lots of other games you can create, and there are some examples here on the slide, as well as some examples of ones that I actually have used myself. The main thing I would suggest when it comes to looking for the right kind of games to make for yourself is to join some Facebook genre groups that match your own and watch what authors are posting during like their takeovers when they're trying to promote their new release, etc., and kind of get a feel for what readers are reacting to the most, because those are the ones that you're going to want to focus on. If everyone is doing emoji posts and readers are loving them, then you definitely want to go down that route. But if readers are more or less ignoring them, then it's a little bit more waste of time to put a lot of effort into that. So like you can get a good feel for what readers in your genre um respond to by watching what other authors are actually doing. So yep, here are a couple of examples. So one is The Last Thing That They Drank Created Magic. I couldn't pass this up on this one, as the witches in this universe drink tea and get magic from it. So the last thing they drank gave them magic, just worked too well to ignore. The other one is a predictive text one, and I do try and keep these to a minimum. And that's because anyone who is using a device without predictive text can't play. So when it comes to emojis, almost everyone has access to them, even through the little face on Facebook dashboard. Whereas, yeah, with predictive text, not everyone has access to that, especially if they're on an older phone or on a laptop. So yeah, I do try and keep these ones to a minimum. This one was just too good to pass up. So there are a few things that you shouldn't be using to create your interactive games with, and this is why we're going to talk a little bit about those. So you want to avoid using birth dates, months, years, first pets' names, street names, house numbers, anything like that. Basically, it's anything that asks readers to give identifying information that could be used to steal their identities. Now, I'd like to think that none of you are trying to steal any identities, but people do come and look at other people's posts to see these kind of things. Don't make it easy for them, just avoid those things. Other than the identity theft, the other reason to avoid anything that never changes is exactly that. It never changes. This is why the asking for the first initial on their game was breaks one of my own rules because of this part. If you ask for something like height, like or the first initial of your name, or even like the favorite color, it's not something that changes very often for most people or at all in a lot of cases. So the second time they see the game, they might not be as inclined to play. Whereas if it's something that's always changing one day to the next, so like battery percent, shirt color, sock color, then they might play multiple times in one day. This is even true for the emojis, as they do move around, especially as you use them to react to emoji games. And I've even seen readers come back and play the game a second time the same day just to see what they get now. And if it's not the same day, it's the day after. So this really does work. Whereas if it's something static, they can't do that. It's not even an option. You are trying to maximize engagement. So avoiding these things is just a really easy way of doing that. So, another thing to avoid is anything that is too specific to your book. While readers who know your books inside out might be really excited to know which of your love interests they're going on a date with, anyone who hasn't read your book isn't going to have a clue what you're on about, and they'll likely just tune out and not pay any attention. So, I have an example here, and full disclaimer, I actually made this today well, on the day of recording, to demonstrate this. It is based on a game I have seen a lot of authors playing. I just didn't want to name and shame. So on the left, the version includes the names of the first 10 love interests from my Obscure Academy series. Now, I imagine that to most people watching this, it doesn't mean anything unless you happen to have read all 10 of the first books in my Obscure Academy series. They also mean nothing to any new readers to me, anyone who hasn't read all 10 books, anyone who just has a not so good memory and can't remember who Josh or Cypress are. So people don't really know whether to be excited about who they land on or not. Another potential pitfall of this particular game is that it's gender specific, and so that's automatically excluding anyone who isn't actually interested in going on a date with a man for whatever reason that may be. So again, it's just another reason like you're cutting out another group of people even without trying, basically. So the second version would work. And in fact, I do plan on moving this into my folder of games I've never used because it's a good one. Um Instead of their names, I've switched out with what type of paranormal they are. With one exception, where their type of paranormal was actually replaced by what the main character is to avoid a repetition. So now people who are new to the series are going to learn more about it from the game. They're going to learn that all these supernatural types are in the series, so it's mixed. That's they're going on a date, so it's probably romance. And then yeah, suddenly they have a lot more information than just this list of names that means nothing. So the added benefit is also that they probably have an opinion. Like they know if they want to go on a date with a vampire or a tiger shifter or a siren before they've even read the book. After they've read the book, maybe they'll have an opinion uh on Shane or Jeremy or well Melody is the siren rather than Josh, but you get the picture. So this kind of thing, the original could work in a very closed environment where you know that everybody has read the book and that everybody is excited about the book. But it still is, yeah, limiting in terms of engagement for that reason alone. So I've been through some of the different types of content that you can make. So here are some of the things that you can pull from to make those. So the first is tropes, and as I'm sure you know, a lot of romance readers love tropes. So when you've got a strong one in your book, you're going to want to use it to attract readers who love it. The second is theme, things like mythology, small town settings, something that's showcasing the tone of your books. The third is content. So that's from the book itself, particularly strong scenes and moments that you believe could sell your book. And the final one is relatable moments. Readers love to see ways they can connect with characters, so small relatable moments can work great for this kind of situation. So, using tropes is pretty straightforward and can be useful for attracting the right kind of readers to your books. You don't have to use the exact trope name on the graphics you're creating, though obviously it is quite strong if you do. You just have to make sure that you're invoking the sense of the trope. So that's what I've done in the top example here, which is a forbidden romance. If you know your Egyptian mythology, you might be able to guess that that is Nut from the story of Nut and Geb. Here it's he's a 10, but she's not supposed to be with him. So it's saying forbidden romance without saying forbidden romance. But you can also use the name, like I've done in the second example here, where only one bed is actually mentioned. This one does also touch on the second one of the secondary tropes, which is the princess bodyguard trope. That's also in the book too. So this one's doing a good job of conveying the tropes of the book. Tropes are effective. They always are, particularly when you're targeting romance readers. So definitely use them, especially when you've got strong ones going on. Themes are a great source of material for series that have strong themes. I know I'm sounding like I'm repeating myself here, but I haven't named these fancy things, so that's just how that's happening. So it's especially true when these themes are a selling point. So some examples of this could be mythology, fairy tale retelling, small town, vampires, anything like that, really. There are loads more contemporary ones. I'm just a fantasy author, so that's just what's coming through. So it's basically anything that's influencing the tone of the entire series. Um, I use this type of content a lot for first in series, where I'm typically trying to make more variety of posts because I know I'm going to be using them more over the course of the series life, and that I'm probably going to need them more than the once every 6 months that I like to reuse content in. So here are two examples. They're both for first in series. The top one is for my Egyptian mythology fantasy romance series. So it's talking about the item on your left is what you're the goddess of, which is very like is very in keeping with the theme. However, I have noticed I do need to edit that one to make it gender neutral. I haven't. The bottom one is for my fairy tale retelling series. So these are towers to escape from. This one does go a little bit further and actually go for the theme of the book, which is Rapunzel. But it works in general because, the fairy tale theme is still coming across with towers, regardless of if it's Rapunzel or not. So when it comes to creating content, using your content, this is where it's best to be careful not to be too specific. The content will include something related to the plot of the book or the series. That's unavoidable, especially when you're using it to create a game. But it still needs to be understandable to a person who hasn't actually read the book yet. So the first example here is actually a very popular game that I've got. One of the comments from the Does It Sell book side actually comes from the last time I posted this game. This one is completely influenced by the content of the book. In it, Grace and Henry engage in a pixie dust war where they curse each other with minor curses that last for an hour. It's all consensual. They agree to do it. It was actually a lot of fun to write. So all 10 of these curses are used at some point during the book. I actually pulled them for this game during editing because I had such a fantastic idea for the game and I was like, I've got to play this. But they're not so specific that people can't relate to the answers. So, like a stone in your shoe, or you can taste your words. Like, you can imagine what that's going to turn out like. So, in this case, there's also the added addition of I asked readers how they'd hold up when they're lasting for an hour and like what they're going to do. This one is especially good because it conveys the tone of the book. It's a not very serious take on enemies to lovers, and it's just a lot of fun. And yeah, that probably comes across, I would hope, in this particular game, and actually in the media kit for this series, that book and series as a whole. The second example is a little bit more general, with herding gods versus herding cats. Both of these are very relevant to the characters in the respective series, and as you can probably imagine, most people have very strong opinions on this one, going for the gods because they'll be easier than the cats, basically. It's gone down very well every time I play it, but again, yeah, it's very much leaning on the content here. Matt, in her book and then the series in general, really does have a hard time herding gods, and Mona in First Time's Charm creates 11 magical kittens over the course of the series and has to manage having 11 magical kittens in her room. So like this is very related to the books and the series that these come from. And finally, we come to relatable moments. Of the four categories, this is probably the one I use the least for interactive content, but I do use it quite a lot for the he's a 10, she's a 10 one. It is very useful for gaining reader sympathy and understanding with your characters because, yeah, we're going with relatable moments. So the top one went down particularly well with the dog owners in my group and on my page as they recognised their own dog in it. In fact, the scene was inspired by Fudge Stick, my own dog, who was being very annoying and claiming I hadn't fed him while I was trying to write this scene. I actually can't remember the exact scene that it's in, but Annie was getting very annoyed because her jackal was claiming she hadn't been fed when she had. So yeah, that one went down really well because people were relating to it. It's such a mundane thing for this fantasy heroine who's actually very important in her temple to be dealing with ultimately a hungry dog. So yeah, readers can then connect with her, and that's really helpful for encouraging them to um yeah, connect with the character. Sorry, that wasn't very eloquent of me, was it? The second one is a little less real life relatable, but I knew it'd gain a lot of interest from readers because who doesn't want to have a gorgeous library? When my partner read this book, the first thing she said to me was, "The library gave me Beauty and the Beast vibes." So, what reader doesn't want the Beauty and the Beast library, really? These are great sources of content for when you want your readers to really connect with your characters and understand your characters and make them seem more real. So that's really the purpose of the relatable moments to me. And that's why a lot of them end up in the he's a 10, she's a 10, because yeah, that's where people can be very relatable. So, what if you can't use the main themes of a book to make the content? I've got two case studies for you here. One is Finding Answers for Confused Succubi, and the other is Crown of Grief. You might have figured out already after seeing a lot of the examples of my social media content and me talking about them, but my brand tends towards quite light-hearted, upbeat, fun, and that's what my readers comment on, and that's what they like in my group and my page, and it's very much about the fun atmosphere, basically. But that's why these two books in particular, they're not the only ones, but these two are probably the strongest ones I have to talk about. It's why they provided a little bit of a challenge. So, my first case study is for Finding Answers for Confused Succubi. This is book 10 in my suite, as in no heat, not the tone, though. The tone is also sweet, but both it's both no heat and sweet tone wise. New adult paranormal romance series, Obscure Academy. It follows Mandy, a succubus who has experienced problems with her magic, and she reaches out to Darius, who is a cupid who suspects that she might actually be asexual. The story unfolds with Mandy coming to terms with her asexuality and how it contradicts with her nature as a succubus. The solution isn't that she has sex anyway, despite being uncomfortable. The story is very much about her acceptance of her identity, and it's definitely not about overriding it. As I mentioned, it's also a no heat series, so that would very much contradict that if that was how I solved that. It's a serious topic. Asexuality is not often dealt with in romance books, and it's a one that was very important and is very important for me to get right. But that meant that it was actually quite difficult to create a lot of the interactive content and keeping it with the fun theme and stuff without feeling like I was being dismissive of a very serious topic. So, because of this, um, I went with some examples of moments where it wasn't quite as relevant. So, like Mandy finding out that Darius was a Cupid, which she didn't actually know, and a really small moment of her eating chocolate a little bit weird. She did faint and then she ate some chocolate. Um, I do think that this media kit is a little bit weaker, especially compared to some of the other books in the series that have such strong hooks that can be used for the interactive content, like a vampire who can't drink blood, a ghoul who's vegetarian, and a mermaid who can't swim. But the informative posts did allow me to get a little bit into more detail about why that might be. And again, it was a very important book for me to get right, and that did stretch to the interactive content. Case study 2 is for Crown of Grief, which is a side story to my urban fantasy series, The Apprentice of Anubis. The title might give away some of the things about why this book potentially caused some issues with marketing. The title is very on the nose. So I wrote the first draft of this book about a month after my mum died. It was last year, so it was very fresh. I'd already planned for Iset, the main character, to have a story. I had it all mapped out, everything, um, and then it all just changed. In this timeline of the series, the Pharaoh, who is Iset's father, died around the end of book 8. That had been my plan since very early in the series, a lot earlier than when my own mum died. And I'd only just written book 8 at that point, so it was quite fresh in my mind as well as the grief that I was going through myself. The original story that I had planned for Iset was set before the death of her father and was more of a light-hearted princess bodyguard romance, delving a little bit into the animal companion side of the series. And then one day I was walking Fudge our dog, and scenes started coming to me very much inspired by the way I was feeling about losing my mum. And it moved the story on in the timeline until around the book 8 mark where her father died. I came home from the walk and I basically sat down and I wrote and cried for 12 hours straight. It was a little bit of a mess when I was done, but it was a very cathartic part of my process and was part of processing my own grief. So this is a very special book to me, actually. This does mean that the tone of the book is different than I planned. I decided to publish it. I did edit multiple times first. Um, One of the reasons that I decided to publish was that the whole series is actually about death and the afterlife and the respect for the death and the afterlife. So, despite it being sad, it actually fit very well in the series and the world. So, I did actually decide that I was okay with pressing the publish button. But the context and the content did make it difficult to make the interactive content based on the content or the tropes themselves. The original trope that I planned, the Princess Bodyguard romance, is still there. It's not a major part of the plot anymore. And obviously, I felt that marketing as a Princess Bodyguard romance was a little misleading for what the book actually is. So instead, I focused on other elements. For example, I leaned into the Egyptian royal theme with this choice of the headdress game, and she's the heir to an entire empire. Um, so I very much leaned into that. Do keep in mind that by the time I released this, I think book 9 had also released, potentially. I can't remember. So my readers very much knew what to expect. They already knew that her father was dead. They already knew who she was. So it wasn't a horrible surprise that this book was a bit sad. The media kit for this one actually came out pretty strong. Again, because my readers knew what to expect from the series. As I said, the whole series follows Bullen and Balmer. They've been dealing with dead bodies since book 1, so the fact that a side character was dealing with grief from the other side was not actually completely unexpected. So that also did help with that. But yeah, the interactive content is very much centered around the themes of the book, um, rather than the actual content of the book. So, what if there are two authors? So, for this section, there aren't just examples from my social media content, but from Arizona Tapes too. Arizona is my real life partner, and we've also been co writing since 2017. So, we've written somewhere between 30 and 40 books together at this point. I honestly can't tell you the answer to that. We lost count a while ago. She has given me permission to use her graphics, and she did proof my presentation before I finalized it. So this isn't going to be a surprise to her that I've included these. If you're co-writing, branding can present a little bit of a dilemma. If you may have noticed any of mine in Arizona co-writes in the examples on all the other slides, and I am now trying to think if there are any. I might have not used any in the end. You'll have seen that they appeared on my branding. This is normally how we do it. If I'm posting about something, it'll be on my branding, and if she's posting about something, it will be on her branding. Sometimes we'll need a joint graphic. So, for example, when we're posting it to the co op group we're both part of, and we otherwise would have to decide whose branding it was going on. In that case, we use a background based on the covers for the related series. So here you can see two examples for two of our co-written series. My branding is on the left and Arizona branding is on the right. And then in the middle is for the series. So there is Purple Oak Oasis on the top there and Amethyst One Shot Mysteries on the bottom. We rarely use the middle versions and mostly stick with personal branding as we purposely write our co-writes in a way that hits both of our brands anyway. But just in case you were wondering how to do this is one of the ways. So when it comes to joint releases, we don't want to have the same content going out on both of our pages, especially considering that we do have some joint readers. In cases like that, we'll basically create double the content. Like here, you can see part of the set for Mer's Journey. It's just four of the games. With a lot of these all based around Inez's frog familiar Benoit. He was really fun to write. So here you can see that we've actually made four different games, and two of them are my branding, and two of them are on Arizona's branding. We do make them in the Unverse too, so all of the ones on my branding are also made in Arizona's branding, but not posted during release, and the opposite way around is true too. We'll basically save those for when we have a sale or something, and then we'll switch. So I will post the ones that she posted for release, and she will post the ones I posted for release. Got that the right way around, I think. So that way we're not having double the same content going out. Creating in jokes with readers. This is something that just happens, tends to be naturally, and I would suggest letting it be natural. And my advice is just to lean into it. So here are two examples. You will be able to find them anytime that I post these games. They do happen. So the first is Tom. Tom appears in the Thanks for Nothing grid because of the word grandmother, which is backwards. But it took me ages to work it out. So at the start, I was just really confused about why everyone was seeing this guy Tom, and that was part of my interaction. Was like, I have no idea where Tom's come from. But now every time I play the game, people still start talking about Tom and it's what his motives are, and some people like to combine him. So it's Tom with the candlestick, which is also in there. It's not a purposeful thing, but it's fun to talk about it with readers, and this game is consistently popular. It doesn't matter when I play it, always gets a lot of attention. So the other one on the shifting forms for clumsy feline grid is the word eel. This one is purely accidental. It's not part of another word that I can figure out. It's just accidentally there. But readers bring it up every time, and people laugh over the fact that it's an accidental insert that fits over the theme of the game. They're also not super impressed that they now have to shift into eels. It's generally how it goes. So basically, don't worry about these. You don't need to fix it. Readers enjoy them, and it creates a bit of conversation, um, which is the whole point of all of this. So it's absolutely fine if they're all like, "Oh, Tom's up to his old tricks again," or I don't want to shift into an eel. Well, who does? Doesn't sound too fun. especially when you've got things like tiger and leopard in that grid. So yeah, just lean into it, make the most of it. I also have a reader who likes to take all the games for the week and continue them through each other and let them influence the answers to the next game. So that's also really fun. I do encourage them to do that because it's just a little bit extra fun and it's more people engaging. So there's been a lot of talk of examples so far. So now we're just going to talk very briefly about creating the content itself and like creating the graphics. So when you're creating your games and your graphics, it's important to use licensed images. So these can either be from a stock site like Deposit Photos, which is what I personally use. It can take some searching around to find what you want, but they do have a very good stock library there. Or the other way is something that I mentioned briefly before, which is if you have your own character art or drawings for the series, you can use those too. So you want to brand the graphic to you, while the arrow pointing to um, is pointing specifically to my logo. That's not the only thing branded on this graphic. The blue background is the one I always use. The flowers around the edges are custom drawn for me, and the font is Desire, which I always use on my graphics. And it's in a color that matches the stalks of the flowers. The new circle is also part of a branded set of labels I have in my collars, uh, and with my fonts. The font on that is also Desire. This is a step above. I personally like things very branded, which is why I have a set of labels, which is why I have um, my background in all different sizes and stuff. So it is an optional thing. You could just pick a color or whatever. I won't get into that because that's a completely different topic of conversation. But I just want to put that out there that you don't have to be doing all of this um, the exact same way. There is a lot of leeway depending on what your personal brand is. In the case of this specific graphic, you can also see that there is a series logo at the top of the graphic. I don't always put this on. I only do it if it fits. Um, but sometimes I will. I mean, the logo is also on the cover, um, as it should be. Speaking of the new circle, using tags for important information just to draw attention to it. So, is this new? Is it a pre order? Is it free? Is it 99 cents? Like, they can all help grab reader attention, even when you're playing a game like this. And finally, you've got the book cover. You're trying to sell a book, so you do want to signpost that. This is actually an old style graphic. I haven't updated it yet. You might have seen some of the choice graphics earlier had the covers in the corner. The covers are still on there. They're just smaller. It's just about layout and space. So yeah, again, you can choose how big or small it's there. Just make sure it's there. When I've talked to author friends about creating media kits and all that comes with it, one thing that always comes up is time. And it does take time to do. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's an instant thing because it's not. But I do have some tips that I think might help with streamlining and may hopefully making it a little bit easier for you to create what you need to. So I personally use Canva for my graphics, but there are plenty of other services you can use too, and you just have to apply the same theory, just using their services. So the first tip is to create yourself a template with a full media kit. Include every type of post you want to make. You don't have to make them all for every book. You can choose which ones you do and don't want, but it will make things easier if all of your post types are all in one place. Also play around with the order of them and find what makes the most sense for you in making them, because you want to make this part of the process as streamlined as possible. When it's time to make a media kit, copy the template and start dragging and dropping everything into position. It cuts down on a lot of work if you have this all in place, and then you can just make those changes. So the second tip is to make your media kit straight after you've finished writing. I actually use it as part of my cool down after I finish a book, but that's just personal preference. Just after I finish writing, the whole thing is fresh in my head and I can make the most effective content because I remember all the small things basically. If I have a really strong idea for a particular game or post, I will make it while I'm still writing, um, or at any other time. Basically, if a good idea comes to you, jump on it. So tip 3, if it's been a while since you wrote the book, reread it before making the media kit. This one might be a little controversial, especially as I know some authors don't like to reread their work, but I highly recommend it. Just like with after writing a book, after reading it, everything is fresh in my head, which makes it a lot easier for me to come up with all the content. And as an added bonus, you get to fix those pesky typos that seem to slip by everyone while you're in there reading. And you might discover that actually the book is not bad. I have found that a few times. So, tip 4 is nothing is set in stone. You can change the layout of a post type, stop doing a post, add in a new one anytime you want. It doesn't have to be the same, exact same every single time. It doesn't have to be the exact same for every single book. You can just go with what works. So, what are you doing with all of this content once you've made it? The first thing I'd say is schedule it. Get it on your own social media, make yourself your own little schedule. More on that in a sec. And yeah, go for it. Get it out there. So you can also use it to fill in gaps in your release schedule on social media. So like say you've got had a release last month and you've got one next month but nothing this month. What are you filling that gap with? Maybe pull out a backlist series, make yourself a nice media kit and get that going out to your readers during that time. You can also use them for takeovers and events when you're invited by other authors to come and post and share. Um, and that can, yeah, get you some nice interaction going with their readers and have give them a better sense of you and your book than just a plain info post might actually do. So yeah, I am a fan of takeovers. I've found a way to make them work for me. It's a little bit of a different topic almost, but most of the time I use it to interact with readers and grow my potential reader pool rather than actually making direct sales. So, when it comes to a social media schedule, there are several ways that you can set it up. You could do it on a monthly system where you do a set type post each day or each week, a weekly system, which again, each day, or you can do it based on sales and releases, which is what I actually do. I'd recommend at least 3 posts a day. It may seem like a lot, but Facebook does reward consistency, so that's why I would suggest it. You can do more or less. The important thing is that yeah, you're getting on and you're interacting with your readers. So I personally use a 10-day schedule for releases. My sale one goes for the length of the sale, regardless of how long that is. But if I want to add more time before release or after release, I will also do that. I do try to be flexible with myself on this. So you can see an example of my schedule sheet here. It starts 3 days before release and ends a week after release with posts spread in a way that I've personally found works. This does take into account what else I know is going on and when it starts and ends. As you can probably guess, it's a 10-day thing. So the 3 days, if I've got two releases back to back, I do write short, so it's not unusual for me to have I release one week and then I release the next week. Then the 3 days at the start of one media kit will overlap with the 3 days at the end of the media kit. So it is set up like that. Um, yeah, so it is taking into account what else I have scheduled, that I will also have sales running, that might have cover rebrands running, or an anthology that's also released, or whatever else I'm doing at the time. Like it does tend to be multiple things going on at once. That's just me. I know a lot of authors like to focus on one thing at once. I'm not that kind of person. I am a doing a little bit of everything for everything. I have multiple open series, um so yeah, I had to find what works for me. So definitely play around with it and find what works for you. When it comes to recycling content, it's worth tracking what you use in order to not repeat it too soon. So, I have mentioned this previously, but I personally like to leave 6 months between reusing content. It rarely works out that way, but I do set myself 3 month minimum between using one post, and then reusing it again. It is a completely arbitrary amount. You can choose whatever gap you want. I would recommend choosing one because the more people see a post, the more likely they are to just ignore it the next time they see it. So that's why I like to leave a gap so that there is actually time for them to forget the post and then re-see the post, so they'll interact with it just as much the next time. So one way to recycle content is to use the same game for multiple series, though I do still make this abide by my 6 month gap between using things. So here is an example of that. I originally created this game to promote Awakened Princess, which is a fantasy fairy tale romantasy series. It's also a backlist title, so I knew I probably only need this game once and then probably not need it for a good while afterwards. But it also fits well with the plot of Princess of Peas, which is part of my Grim Academy series, which is one of my frontlist series. So I need those games a little bit more often. So I reused it. It still has abided by my 6 month rule. You can also see that this is also an old style graphics here. I haven't updated my Princess of Peas media kit yet, so I don't have them both in the square, but you get enough of the picture from this. I've mentioned Meta Business Center a few times during the course of the presentation, and so it's only fair that there is now a screenshot of Meta Business Center. So as you can see, this is actually January 2024. It's from a while ago. And you can see some of my content scheduled there, um, including one of the games that I just talked about, I think, in the corner. That's fun. So one of the ways that I recycle content is for sales. So when I have a 99 cent or a free sale on a book, and so then I'll recycle them. Another reason is that these boxes pop up, which are telling me about my interactive times, and I should put a post there. Sometimes I'll use those for the next media kit coming up if the days coincide. If it doesn't, I will go to the folders where I have everything saved. It's just on my desktop. I save by content type and then the month that it was used. And I'll just go pick one that hasn't been used in 6 months and I will fill this gap. I'll also take into account what else is going on. So, for example, I can see here that there's stuff running for Jinx Paranormal Dating Agency. So I wouldn't pick something for Jinx. I would probably pick something for one of my fantasy romance series to kind of balance that out. So I do put a lot of thought into what's going out. But yeah, that's one of the things I use recycle content for. So there are a lot of reasons to recycle content. Instead of doing that, I could just make new content every time, but that is time consuming. So one of the reasons is that it's there, and people will have forgotten it after 6 months anyway. So it's worth redoing. But here is another example. So this is a post that I first made during the release of Minor Inconveniences for Annoyed Pixies in July 2023. And I then reposted it in January 2024. At which point, some of my readers commented saying how much they loved the book and how much they really enjoyed the story and all of the hijinks that went on in it. And then this reader went on to say that she was rereading it because of this specific post. While only one reader specifically mentioned it on the post, I did later find out that multiple other readers had done rereads of the series because I'd rerun some of the content from the media kit. So it was a real win for me because until this point, I'd only been able to guess, but then there were multiple people coming and telling me that they were rereading because I'd specifically posted things about Grace and Henry's story. So while rereading doesn't immediately bring me more revenue unless the reader is using Cobra Plus to read, which does pay for rereads, it does a couple of things. First, it makes this particular reader more invested in the series. Maybe this is the last book of the series that they read, and they haven't picked up books 8 to 10, which were all out by the time of this post. And then that reader will go on and read them. But mostly it's also social proof for other readers. If someone comes along and sees this post and then they're reading comments about how much my readers love it and that they're rereading it and that's how much they love it, if they're in the mood for an upbeat new adult paranormal romance with a light enemies to lovers theme and pixie dust war, then they're going to get the book. because they've got this social proof that people have really loved it. So this is actually a good reason to repost. It's been 6 months. More people have had a chance to read this book compared to when I posted Meet Grace before, which will have been on release day. So at that point, only my ARC readers would have read it. Um, so yeah, it's given a lot more people time to get into it and then comment and say how much they loved it. So, this brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to me today. I hope you've gained lots of ideas for your Facebook content and wish you happy creating if you're off to go and make yourself some more media content. If you're not sure where to start in creating your social media content and want a bit more of a helping hand, or you're just feeling a little bit overwhelmed by how much that you need to do, I've put together a media kit template that you can get $5 off the price using the code Facebook5. So this is just, it's ready to use in Canva. It's drag and drop. You just need to personalize it and put your information in. There are 24 slides, I think. So it's a good place to start if you want that. Of course, if you want to create your own, you're absolutely welcome to. I hope you find lots of great ideas, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. So thank you again for listening.